Hello and welcome to this 10 art styles challenge video. This is the second one I'm uploading on this channel. I already drew Ether in 10 different art styles since I really enjoyed it, and I also have some other art styles I wanted to try out. I decided to also do the challenge for another Genshin Impact character, and this time it's my favorite character, which is Chongyun. And I'm gonna go over 10 different art styles today. In general, like with the Ether video, the eyes shapes and face shapes are what makes most of these styles different, is what I realized by drawing in all the different styles. And with each of the styles, I'll first explain some things I recognized about them, then I'll also talk about my own experience when drawing, and at the end I'll go over which one of the styles I liked the most, or which ones were the most fun to draw and which I didn't like that much. It's always cool to explore new art styles to me, since it helps to get an idea of what you yourself really like about styles and what you could implement in your own style from other ones. So yeah, let's get started. The first style we have is Disney. In this style they use big round eyes, but the eye shape also really changed over the years. In the earlier Disney films, the 2D films, the eyes aren't as round and big. They are still big, but nowadays with like Rapunzel or Elsa, the eyes are clearly rounder and bigger. Also the face shape changed over the time a lot. Nowadays it's more of a round wide shape, while it used to be often longer and thinner face shapes. They always have this small nose and rosy cheeks. The body types they use are mostly like thin and simplified. And I went for a 2D style, but then implemented more of Elsa or Rapunzel's eyes and face shape. I did a rather wide version. If I went for a look like Aurora, Cinderella or Tiana, I could have done a longer and thinner face as well. But they often don't use any shading, is what I realized, and I didn't even know that before that well. This was very interesting to learn. Next up we have Tangled the series. Right after Disney, why not implement a Disney show? This style is very different from the other ones since they don't really use any lines. They only use lines to differentiate between different shapes overlapping, like with the clothes. And the nose is a shape and has this slightly darker color than the skin, and it can have very different shapes depending on the character. The eyes are very round and big. They have lines as a mouth, and for women they also implement lips. And most of the characters have a pointy chin and a round face. And under the cheeks or the eyes they have this blush. The hair is portrayed with one color and differently colored lines in it or shapes in it. And the bodies are very stylized and made of simple shapes. While drawing this I mainly used Varian for a reference, which I think you can see very well. And I really struggled with the no lines aspect. The clothes don't have a smooth outline. I used lines at first and then filled in, and when I used the filled in tool I just made it so that it would automatically fill in the area of the lines as well by using like the grow selection tool, and then I erased the lines afterwards. I left the lines only where clothes would overlap. The only real shadow they use is on the neck to separate the neck from the head. Next we go on to another style, which is the Dragon Prince. In this style they use thin lines, and the lines are often also colored. They use a mostly pointy chin, and sometimes they have more square rounded faces. It can really depend on the character. And compared to other art styles, the characters have a rather small forehead and rather long faces. The eyes can be round, triangular, diamond or almond shape, so they use different shapes for them. There's a slight blush on the cheeks and the nose, and they have these small soft noses, and it kind of resembles the Avatar, The Last Airbender style a little bit in my opinion. They use 3D models in this style, which means that the face is always symmetrical, but when drawing I didn't want to use the mirror tool to challenge myself with my observation skills to have the face be as symmetrical as possible, but I could have also just used the mirror tool to really resemble how it would look in the show. But they also use some simple cell shading, and they portray the hair in rather thick strands. Next up we have Lollyrock, and in this style they use thin lines and they have different face shapes. Characters can have a pointy chin or a wide chin, and mostly females have a pointy chin. The girls have bigger eyes than the boys, and there's also a difference in the eyelashes they use. The nose is pretty interesting to me since it's this line with different line thickness. For the mouth, they also make a difference between boys and girls. The girls have differently colored lips and the guys have just a line. The hair is rather simple and has few lines, but there's this big white highlight stripe, or these multiple highlight stripes or shapes, and in general the characters have a very big head and small body. At first the right arm was way too long in my drawing, but I fixed it later on. During the sketch phase, the character I drew, it kind of reminded me of Killua from Hunter x Hunter. When I drew the eyes in the Lollyrock style, that then changed and now it doesn't look that much like Killua anymore. And I also changed up the hand poses since I didn't want both hands to make the same gesture. I think that would have looked kind of weird. I actually really like the proportions of this drawing, but of the original show not as much. The fifth style we have is Noragami, and they use thin black lines and have rather white faces compared to the other styles, but mostly pointy chin and sometimes also very rounded faces. The eyes are not too big compared to other anime styles, and they also use a different eye shape for the characters. The nose is portrayed with two lines, one for the bridge and one at the end, and also there's one point for the nostril. For the mouth they just use a line, and sometimes they have this small indication of the chin underneath. For the hair they implement some strands and always have shading on it, and sometimes they use highlights. For this they use a mix of small lines and edgy shapes. They just make use of regular cell shading. The eyes are pretty far apart in my drawing, and in the show I think they also are rather far apart, but I kind of fixed it for my final drawing. So in my opinion, in my own drawing, the eyes were too far apart at first. Next up we have Gravity Falls. In this style they use rather thick black lines. The head shapes can be very different, but they are mostly rounded, and the eyes are literally circles and have just points in them. For pupils, the nose shapes can be very different. I decided to go for a shape like Mabel or Dipper. They don't use any lips. Some characters have facial marks like blush or colored nose. I went with a little blush for Chongyun. The hair is one simple shape with a few small blobs. Most of the time they don't use any shading at all, and sometimes they use some cell shading. I decided not to use any shading in my drawing, and the anatomy is very simplified and looks like stick figures almost, but the characters are not portrayed as thin as many other characters, and the proportions are just very simplified. I know that for the legs they also just use like almost sticks. And the seventh style we have is She-Ra, and in this style they use rather thin black lines and have mostly big eyes. And for the eyes they have one thin line at the lower end and then one thicker line at the upper end. And the mouth is just a line, and for the noses they can look a little different for each character, but they are always rather small. In the show they also include different body types, which are always simplified but not that muscular. They just use many simple shapes. Very often they don't use any shadows in the show, and while drawing this I realized that many of the faces are pretty long, at least longer than I thought they would be. I also included this face mark, which for example Adora or Bow have, but not every character has them. What really changed this drawing was making the eyes have this black area in the upper iris like Dora has in her eyes. Somehow it made the drawing look very cute to me, so I really like how this style turned out. Now let's move on to the 8th style, which is the Owl House, and in this style they use rather thick black lines and they have very different eye shapes. They can be round or triangle-like, but for the iris and pupils they just use like these round shapes with a white reflection. The eyebrows can be very different, and the noses as well, but they are always very simple. The mouth is just a line, but some characters have lips. They also use regular cell shading in the show, and they have different body types, but all are very simple and like I would say stick-like. And I did the eyes kind of weird at first, but then changed them to make them open wide at the end, which I'm very glad about. I like the simplification of this show. I preferred to how they would do it in Gravity Falls, for example. And the next style we have is Lego Elves, and in this style they use thin brown lines. The characters always have eyelashes. They have a simple mouth but lipstick on some of the girls. For the nose they use also very small lines for the noses. Overall this style kind of fits into between Avatar: The Last Airbender and anime to me, and I know that characters in the show were actually drawn by the same studio that made Legend of Korra, which is Studio Mir, and you can definitely see the resemblance in my opinion. I personally prefer the looks of the characters of the show Lego Elves to the Avatar style. I also like how they simplified an anatomy in the show. They have these small indications of muscles, like with shoulders for example, and while drawing this, the face I drew was too long at first, and I also implemented a few expressions. And the last style for this video we have is Haikyuu, and in this style they use thin black lines and the chin is pointy, and in general the faces have a pretty small and rounded jaw, and the eyes are rather high up on the face. There's a line above and on the side below the eye. They often use like multiple small lines to add some detail, or they also have these incomplete lines where there's some empty space in between. And if you watched my Ether 10 styles video, this reminds me of, spoilers in case you haven't seen it yet, reminds me of the Horimiya style. I also drew Ether in there. The iris can be either this round oval shape or a big round circle shape. The noses can be portrayed with one big long line or two lines, and underneath the chin they have this small black shadow, which also is something special about this show. And you can't really see it in my drawing here, but in the show they use many lines to define anatomy, which really makes sense since the show is focused on sports. While drawing I tried many different poses for the right hand. The face is kinda too wide in my opinion, but you could say it's because of the style, but maybe, I don't know if Jonghyun would have a wide face like this in the show. For the eyes I did them like Tadashi's, like some of the other characters, but most of the characters of Karasu no High actually have a rather round pupil. I tried to implement it in my version, but I didn't like how it turned out, so I just went with the long, small pupil version. I also imagined that Jonghyun would have a hair structure which is similar to Hinata's, so I took inspiration from that when I was drawing Jonghyun's hair. I also tried to give this like texture feeling to the outfit of Jonghyun, which they often use these many lines on the outfits of the characters in the show, which I find also very, very interesting. I also implemented like 2 expressions for this. That's it for the last style for this video. And now let's just quickly go over which styles I like the most or the least aesthetically, or which were the most fun to draw. You can also comment which ones you think turned out the best or you like the most, or which you feel you are very inspired by. For me, the styles I don't like very much aesthetically are Gravity Falls, The Owl House, also Haikyuu, mainly because of the face, how it looks, and then also Tangled the series. Yeah, Tangled the series was also the least fun to draw. Hardest styles to draw were Tangled the series, also the Disney style was kind of hard, and then in general The Owl House and Gravity Falls were just very easy to draw compared to the other styles. The styles that I find most aesthetically pleasing and I also want to kind of take inspiration for my own style from are She-Ra, Lego Elves and Lollyrock. The ones that were the most fun to draw were She-Ra, Haikyuu and Lego Elves. If you stayed until the end, then I have a little gift for you, but if you already watched the other video, then you already know what I'm talking about. So in the description I included a link to a Google document where I made some notes on the styles in here, plus some more styles in more detail. I go over the line thickness, how they do faces or facial features, proportions and shading or lightening, and sometimes I also go over the outfits or palettes and backgrounds they use in the styles. If you want to try out some of the other art styles as well, this could be very handy. In this document there are 33 styles actually, and I made use of 20 of them up until now for the art style videos, but there you can find some notes on more other styles as well if you're interested. That's it for the little surprise. I could imagine doing more 10 art style challenges, mostly with anime styles in the future, or some other art challenges like drawing myself into different anime, or something like drawing multiple Genshin characters as Haikyuu characters, because I think it kind of really would be very interesting, or designing an own cast of characters for a specific show, or just coming up with a design but going for the style of the show. All of that would be very cool to me, but with all these ideas I don't have time to do all of them. But if you really want to see any of these ideas or are interested in that, you can leave a comment, and if you like this video you can definitely also leave a like and check out the other 10 art styles video if you haven't yet. But thank you a lot for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it and have a great day. Goodbye.